No one wanted to stand near the black woman in the simple black dress. Conversations died when she walked past. Champagne trays bypassed her like she was invisible. She stood alone by the window, holding a glass of water, watching the room with the calm detachment of a scientist observing an experiment. Then the door opened. The billionaire everyone had been waiting for stepped inside. His eyes swept the glittering crowd, then locked onto her. He smiled like she was the only person he came to see, and he called her name. 30 minutes earlier, Amada Mwangi stepped out of a cab in front of the Langston estate. No limousine. No driver in a pressed suit opening the door for her. Just a yellow taxi that pulled away before she even reached the gate. The security guard looked her up and down, his eyes lingering on her plain black dress, her natural hair, the absence of diamonds on her neck and wrists. He checked her name on the list once, twice, a third time. "Mwangi," she said calmly, "Mwangi." He finally found it, though his expression suggested he still didn't believe she belonged. He waved her through without a word of welcome. Amada didn't react. She had been looked at this way her entire life. In boardrooms across 3 continents. In 5-star hotels where staff assumed she was lost. In elevator rides where women clutched their purses a little tighter. She had learned long ago that her presence in certain spaces was treated as an error to be corrected. Tonight she was here for a reason. Victoria Langston, the host of this glittering affair, had been pursuing a $30 million investment from Amada's fund for months. The pitch was impressive on paper, a green real estate development that promised sustainability and profit in equal measure. Amada's team had done the due diligence. The numbers worked. The projections were solid. But Amada had a rule she never broke. She never invested in people she didn't respect. And she had learned that the best way to know someone's true character was to watch how they treated people they considered unimportant. Tonight she would watch. She had dressed simply on purpose. No designer labels, no statement jewelry, nothing that would announce her net worth before she opened her mouth. She wanted to see what Victoria Langston was like when she thought no one who mattered was looking. The ballroom was everything Amada expected. Crystal chandeliers casting warm light over silk gowns and tailored tuxedos. Waiters gliding through the crowd with silver trays of champagne. The soft hum of conversation punctuated by practiced laughter. Old money and new money mingling in a careful dance of status and aspiration. Amada took a glass of water from a passing tray and positioned herself near the window. She had no intention of drinking champagne tonight. She needed her mind sharp. Within minutes, she noticed the pattern. A group of women stood nearby, their conversation animated and bright. Amada took a step toward them. Without making eye contact, they shifted away, reforming their circle with their backs to her. A waiter passed with a tray of hors d'oeuvres, serving the couple beside her, before moving on as though she were part of the wallpaper. She was being read, assessed, dismissed. Amada almost smiled. The experiment had begun. She caught the eye of a young black man in a server's uniform. He was the only other person of color she had seen in the room besides herself. For a brief moment, their gazes met. He gave her a small nod, barely perceptible, an acknowledgement that needed no words. She nodded back. He understood. She understood. They both knew exactly what kind of room this was. His name tag read James. The whispers started 20 minutes into the party. Amada didn't need to hear the words to know what was being said. She saw it in the sidelong glances, the raised eyebrows, the way people leaned in close to exchange observations about the woman who clearly didn't belong. She stood alone by the window, watching the room reflect its own cruelty back at itself. Then, Victoria Langston appeared. The host of the evening was a tall woman in her mid-40s, with the kind of beauty that came from expensive maintenance. Her blonde hair was swept into an elegant updo. Her dress was Valentino. Her smile was the product of years of practice in front of mirrors and cameras. Victoria's eyes found Amada, and something flickered across her face. Displeasure carefully controlled, a wrinkle in her perfect evening. She didn't approach Amada directly. That would be too obvious. Instead, she positioned herself nearby with a cluster of her closest friends, her voice pitched just loud enough to carry. "I really must speak to security," Victoria said, adjusting her diamond bracelet. "I don't know how they let just anyone walk in. You'd think this was a charity gala." Laughter rippled through the group. A woman beside Victoria, someone Amada would later learn, was named Diana Ross. Pemberton added her own contribution. Diana was the kind of woman who had never been told no in her life, and it showed in the casual cruelty of her smile. "Perhaps she wandered in from the service entrance," Diana said. "Someone should point her back to the kitchen." More laughter, louder this time. Amada heard every word. She was meant to hear every word. She turned her head slightly, just enough to meet Victoria's gaze. Victoria looked away first. Interesting, Amada thought. She noted the reaction and filed it away. The minutes crawled by. Amada remained exactly where she was. She didn't leave. She didn't hide. She didn't shrink into the corners of the room. She simply stood calm and still like a stone in a river that refused to be moved by the current. A man approached her. He was tall, well-dressed, with the anxious energy of someone caught between duty and conscience. Amada recognized him from the research her team had compiled. Marcus Bradley, Victoria's husband, a man who lived in the shadow of his wife's ambition. He opened his mouth as if to speak, then caught Victoria watching from across the room. Her eyes were sharp warning. Marcus closed his mouth, gave Amada an apologetic grimace that he probably thought passed for courage, and retreated. Amada watched him go. He knew what was happening. He knew it was wrong. And he chose to do nothing. That told her everything she needed to know about him. Her phone buzzed softly in her clutch. She glanced at the screen. A message from Richard Ashford. "I'll be there in 30 minutes. Stay. I want to introduce you to some people." Amada felt something shift inside her. Not quite amusement, not quite anticipation. Something in between. Richard Ashford, the man who had believed in her when no one else would. 15 years ago, she had been a nobody. A Kenyan graduate student with a wild idea about venture capital in African markets and nothing but passion to back it up. She had presented her concept at a small conference in Nairobi, and the room had laughed at her. Actually laughed. Richard had been the only one who stayed after. He had asked questions. Real questions. Questions that showed he understood what she was trying to build. A week later, he had written her a check for $500,000. That money had become the seed for everything. Today, her fund managed over $2 billion in assets, and Richard still called it the smartest investment he had ever made. She could leave now. She had seen enough. Victoria Langston had revealed herself. The deal was dead. There was no reason to stay and endure another hour of pointed cruelty. But Richard was coming, and Amada found herself curious. She wanted to see how this story would end. She wanted to watch what happened when the room discovered that the woman they had dismissed was someone who mattered after all. Not because she needed their approval. She had stopped needing that a long time ago, but because there was a certain poetry in letting people expose themselves before the truth arrived. She typed a reply to Richard. "I'll be here." Then she slipped her phone back into her clutch, took a sip of her water, and waited. The room continued to swirl around her, bright and glittering and deliberately blind. No one spoke to her. No one served her. No one acknowledged that she existed. Amada didn't mind. She had learned long ago that real power didn't need to announce itself. Real power could stand alone in a room full of people who thought they were better and feel nothing but calm. The best way to see who someone truly was, she believed, was to become invisible, to let them forget they were being watched. Victoria Langston had forgotten, and Amada had seen everything. The isolation became organized. Amada noticed it within minutes of sending her reply to Richard. Something had shifted in the room. The casual avoidance had transformed into something deliberate, coordinated. Victoria had made her rounds whispering to key guests, and now Amada found herself surrounded by a force field of empty space. Waiters who had merely ignored her before now actively changed direction when they saw her. Guests who happened to drift too close were intercepted by Victoria or Diana, gently steered away with a touch on the elbow and a murmured word. The message had been delivered. The woman by the window was to be treated as though she did not exist. Amada observed it all with quiet fascination. She had seen this before in different forms. The way power operated through exclusion, the way cruelty could be administered without a single raised voice. Victoria Langston was running her party like a military operation, and Amada was the enemy to be neutralized. She almost admired the efficiency of it. Diana Ross Pemberton approached her directly. Unlike Victoria, who preferred to wound from a distance, Diana was the type who enjoyed the kill up close. "I don't believe we've been introduced," Diana said, her smile sharp as cut glass. "I'm Diana Ross Pemberton, and you are—" Amada met her gaze without flinching. "Amada." Diana waited for more. A last name, a title, a reason for existing. When none came, her smile tightened. "Amada," she repeated as though tasting something unpleasant. "And what is it that you do, Amada?" "I observe." The answer clearly wasn't what Diana expected. Her perfectly sculpted eyebrows rose half an inch. "You observe? How fascinating. This isn't a zoo, you know." Amada allowed herself a small smile. "No. It's far more interesting than a zoo." Diana's expression flickered. For a moment, something like uncertainty crossed her face. She wasn't used to people who didn't cower, who didn't rush to explain themselves, who didn't seem to care what she thought of them. Amada's calm was unsettling in a way Diana couldn't quite name. "Well," Diana said, recovering her composure, "I suppose everyone needs a hobby." She turned and walked away, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. Amada watched her go, noting how Diana immediately rejoined Victoria's circle and began whispering urgently. They both glanced in Amada's direction. Let them whisper, Amada thought. Let them wonder. The minutes passed slowly. Amada remained at her post by the window, her water glass nearly empty now, her face revealing nothing. She watched the party continue around her, a glittering performance of wealth and status from which she had been deliberately excluded. She thought about leaving. The smart thing would be to slip out quietly, call her team in the morning, and inform them that Mwangi Capital would not be investing in Victoria Langston's project. The decision had already been made. There was nothing left to learn here. But she stayed. Partly because Richard was coming, partly because something stubborn in her refused to be driven out, and partly because she wanted to see it through. She wanted to watch these people discover who she really was. Not for revenge, not for satisfaction, but because there was a lesson here, and she had always believed in letting lessons complete themselves. At exactly 9:15, the front doors opened. The change in the room was immediate and electric. Conversations halted mid-sentence. Heads turned. A ripple of anticipation moved through the crowd like wind through tall grass. Richard Ashford had arrived. He stood in the doorway for a moment, surveying the room with the easy confidence of a man who had long ago stopped caring what anyone thought of him. He was 68 years old, silver-haired, dressed in a simple navy suit that probably cost more than most people's cars. But it wasn't his clothes that commanded attention. It was his presence, the weight of his reputation, the knowledge that a single word from him could make or break fortunes. Victoria materialized at his side almost instantly, her smile radiant, her hand extended in welcome. "Richard, what an honor. We're so delighted you could join us. I hope you've had a chance to review our proposal. I think you'll find the numbers quite compelling, and I'd love to discuss." Richard accepted her handshake with polite detachment. "Victoria? Yes, I've seen your proposal. We can discuss it later. But first, there's someone I need to see." He stepped past her, his eyes scanning the crowd. Victoria's smile faltered, but she maintained her composure, following his gaze to see who could possibly be more important than her. Richard's eyes found Amada by the window. His face transformed. The distant politeness vanished, replaced by genuine warmth. He crossed the room with purposeful strides, parting the crowd like a ship cutting through water. Guests stepped aside, craning their necks to see where he was going. He stopped in front of Amada, and his smile widened. "Amada Mwangi," he said, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet room. "You actually came to a party. I didn't think I'd live to see the day." Amada's own smile was small but real. "You know I hate these things. I know. But you never do anything without a reason." His eyes twinkled with amusement. "So what's your reason tonight?" "Research," Amada said simply. Richard laughed, a warm sound that seemed to confuse the watching crowd. He turned to face the room, one hand resting on Amada's shoulder in a gesture of unmistakable familiarity. "For those of you who don't know," he announced, his voice easily filling the space, "this is Amada Mwangi, founder and CEO of Mwangi Capital. She turned my $500,000 investment into a $2 billion fund in 15 years, which makes her one of the smartest people I've ever met. And more importantly, one of the few people in this world whose judgment I trust completely." The silence that followed was absolute. Amada watched the faces around her shift and rearrange themselves. Confusion, shock, dawning horror. The woman they had spent the evening dismissing, insulting, and excluding was not a nobody who had wandered in by mistake. She was exactly the kind of person they had been trying to impress all night. Victoria recovered first, though her smile now looked like it had been painted on by a shaking hand. "Amada, my goodness, why didn't you say something I've heard so much about Mwangi Capital? Your work in sustainable investments is absolutely pioneering. What an honor to have you here." Amada looked at Victoria. Just looked. She didn't speak. She didn't smile. The silence stretched. Diana rushed over her earlier cruelty, now buried under layers of desperate charm. "Ms. Mwangi, our conversation earlier was so delightful. I was just telling Victoria how refreshing it is to meet someone with such a sharp wit. We simply must have lunch sometime. I know the most wonderful little place." In Amada's gaze shifted to Diana. The same unblinking calm, the same silence. Diana's words trailed off into nothing. Richard watched this exchange with growing interest. His eyes moved from Amada's face to Victoria's, then to Diana's. Something was wrong. He could feel it. "Amada," he said quietly, "how has your evening been?" "Informative," she replied. One word. But Richard had known Amada for 15 years. He understood what lived beneath her composure. He turned to James, who stood nearby with a tray of champagne glasses. The young server had been watching everything with barely concealed amazement. "Young man," Richard said, "has Ms. Mwangi been well taken care of tonight?" James hesitated. His eyes darted to Victoria, who was watching him with barely disguised panic. His job hung in the balance. One wrong word, and he would be fired before the night was over. But something in Amada's stillness gave him courage. She had nodded to him earlier, the only acknowledgement he had received from a guest all evening. She had seen him when no one else had. "No, sir," James said, his voice steady. "She hasn't been served anything all night. We were told not to." The words landed like stones dropped into still water. "Told not to," Richard repeated slowly. "By whom?" James didn't answer. He didn't need to. His eyes flickered toward Victoria, and that was enough. Richard turned to face Victoria. His expression had changed. The warmth was gone, replaced by something cold and hard. "Victoria," he said, "would you care to explain why your potential $30 million investor was treated like an unwelcome guest in your home?" Victoria's face had gone pale beneath her makeup. "Richard, this is all a terrible misunderstanding. We had no idea who she was. If you had known," Richard interrupted, his voice quiet but sharp. You would have treated her differently. Is that what you're telling me, that your basic human decency is contingent on someone's net worth? Victoria opened her mouth. No words came out. The room had gone completely still. Guests who had been edging closer to witness the spectacle now stood frozen, afraid to draw attention to themselves. Many of them had participated in the evening's cruelty in ways large and small, ignored glances, whispered comments, the collective decision to treat a stranger as beneath contempt. Now they understood the magnitude of their mistake. Amada stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on Richard's arm. "Richard," she said, her voice calm, "it's not necessary." But then she turned to face Victoria directly. When she spoke, her words were quiet, measured, and utterly devastating. "I came here tonight to decide whether Mwangi Capital would invest in your project, $30 million. I wanted to see what kind of person you were when you thought no one important was watching." She let the words settle before continuing. "I didn't tell you who I was because I wanted the truth. And you gave it to me. You showed me exactly who you are when you think someone doesn't matter." Victoria's lips trembled. "Ms. Mwangi, please, I can explain." "You don't need to explain," Amada said. "I understand perfectly. You made a calculation. You looked at me and decided I wasn't worth your time or your courtesy. That's your right. And it's my right to decide what to do with that information." She straightened her shoulders, her gaze sweeping across the room, taking in all the faces that had turned away from her, all the people who had participated in her exclusion. "My answer is no," she said. "Mwangi Capital will not be investing in your project, not now, not ever." The finality in her voice left no room for negotiation. Victoria looked like she might cry, or scream, or both. Her carefully constructed evening was crumbling around her, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. Richard spoke into the silence. "I should mention that I was also considering investing in your project, Victoria. $50 million. Victoria's head snapped toward him, a flicker of desperate hope in her eyes. "Was," Richard repeated. "Past tense. I've learned everything I need to know tonight. About your project, about your company, about you." He offered Amada his arm. "Shall we get some air? I believe this party has served its purpose." Amada took his arm, and together they walked toward the terrace doors. The crowd parted before them in silence. No one dared to speak. No one dared to move. Behind them, Victoria Langston stood alone in the middle of her beautiful party, surrounded by people who were already beginning to distance themselves from her. The whispers would start soon. The story would spread. By morning, everyone who mattered would know what had happened at the Langston estate. But Amada didn't look back to see it. She had already moved on. The terrace was quiet, the noise of the party muffled behind glass doors. The night air was cool, carrying the faint scent of jasmine from the garden below. Amada stood at the stone railing, looking out at the manicured grounds that stretched into darkness. Richard stood beside her, his hands in his pockets, his expression thoughtful. "You planned this," he said. It wasn't a question. Amada considered the words before answering. "Not exactly. I came to learn who Victoria Langston really was. I didn't plan for you to arrive in the middle of it. But you knew I was coming." "I knew." She turned to look at him. "Would you have preferred I warned you?" Richard shook his head slowly. "No. I've spent decades watching people perform for me. Smiling when they want to scream, agreeing when they want to argue. Everyone is so careful around money. They forget I'm watching." He looked back through the glass doors at the party where guests were now clustered in small groups, their body language tense and uncertain. "What happened in there tonight," he continued, "that was real. Victoria showed me exactly who she is. I couldn't have bought that kind of honesty for any price." Amada followed his gaze. Inside, Victoria stood near the bar, her husband Marcus beside her. Even from this distance, Amada could see the strain in Victoria's posture, the rigid set of her shoulders. The evening she had worked so hard to perfect had collapsed around her. "You taught me something once," Amada said quietly. "You told me that character isn't what people show you when they want something from you. It's what they show when they think you have nothing to offer." Richard smiled, a trace of warmth returning to his face. "I remember that conversation. You were the only person at that conference who didn't try to impress me. Everyone else was performing. You just told the truth about what you wanted to build and why." "I cared what you thought," Amada admitted. "I just didn't let it change what I said. That's why I trusted you." Richard turned to face her fully. "And that's why I still do. You could have walked in there tonight and announced who you were. You could have demanded the respect you deserved, but you didn't." "Demanded respect isn't real respect," Amada said. "It's just fear wearing a polite mask." The terrace door opened behind them. Marcus Bradley stepped out, his face pale in the moonlight. He approached them hesitantly, like a man walking toward a judge's bench. "Ms. Mwangi," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "May I speak with you?" Amada turned to face him. She said nothing, but her silence was permission enough. Marcus swallowed hard. "I owe you an apology. I saw what was happening tonight. I knew it was wrong, and I did nothing." He looked down at his hands. "I told myself it wasn't my place, that I shouldn't interfere. But the truth is, I was afraid. Afraid of what Victoria would say. Afraid of making a scene." He finally met Amada's eyes. "That's not an excuse. I know that. I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry. For whatever that's worth." Amada studied him for a long moment. She saw the shame in his face, the genuine regret. He wasn't asking for forgiveness to save himself. He was confessing because the weight of his silence had become too heavy to carry. "Knowing something is wrong and choosing not to act is still a choice," she said. "But admitting that takes courage too. More courage than most people have." Marcus nodded, accepting the judgment and the small grace it contained. He turned and walked back inside without another word. Richard watched him go. "He's not a bad man." "No," Amada agreed. "Just a weak one. There's a difference." They stood in comfortable silence for a few more minutes, watching the party through the glass. The energy in the room had shifted completely. Where there had been laughter and confidence, there was now anxiety and whispered speculation. Victoria was no longer the center of attention. She was the cautionary tale everyone was already rehearsing for tomorrow's conversations. "I should go," Amada said finally. Richard nodded. "I'll call you tomorrow. There's a project in Senegal I want to discuss. Clean energy infrastructure. Right up your alley." Amada smiled. "I'll look forward to it." She walked back through the terrace doors, moving through the party with the same quiet calm she had maintained all evening. But everything was different now. People stepped aside as she passed. Eyes followed her with a mixture of curiosity and fear. The woman who had been invisible was now the most watched person in the room. Victoria intercepted her near the entrance, desperation breaking through her careful facade. "Ms. Mwangi, please, if I could just have 5 minutes to explain. The project is sound. The returns are guaranteed. If you would just give me another chance to—" Amada stopped walking. She looked at Victoria with something that might have been pity. "Victoria," she said gently, "I don't invest in spreadsheets. I invest in people, and I've learned everything I need to know about you tonight." She continued toward the door, leaving Victoria standing alone in her beautiful foyer. James caught up with her just before she reached the exit. He was still in his server's uniform, his tray abandoned somewhere behind him. "Ms. Mwangi," he said, slightly out of breath. "I just wanted to say thank you." Amada turned to face him. "For what?" "For being who you are." He struggled to find the right words. "Earlier tonight when you nodded at me, you were the only guest who acknowledged I existed. Before you knew who I was, before anyone knew who you were, You saw me? Amada's expression softened. For the first time all evening, warmth broke through her composure. You saw me too, she said. When everyone else in this room decided I was beneath their notice, you nodded. That small thing meant more than you know. She reached into her clutch and pulled out a business card. Simple. White. Just her name and a phone number. My fund is always looking for people with integrity, she said, pressing the card into his hand. People who do the right thing even when it costs them something. If you ever want to do something different with your life, call me. James looked down at the card, then back at her. His eyes were bright. Thank you, he said. I will. Amada smiled and walked out the door. The night air embraced her as she descended the front steps. She didn't look back at the glittering windows or the beautiful people inside. She had no interest in watching them scramble to rewrite the story of the evening. A cab pulled up to the curb. She had called it while walking through the foyer. No limousine, no driver. Just a yellow taxi the same way she had arrived. She climbed inside and gave the driver her address. As the cab pulled away from the Langston estate, Amada allowed herself a moment of reflection. She thought about the room full of people who had judged her worthless based on her appearance. She thought about Victoria, who measured human value in designer labels and social connections. She thought about Marcus, trapped by his own cowardice. She thought about James, who had shown more character in a single nod than all the other guests combined. People often asked her why she didn't flaunt her success. Why she drove a modest car, wore simple clothes, avoided the displays of wealth that her position could easily afford. The answer was always the same. She didn't need anyone to believe she was rich before they treated her with basic dignity. And anyone who needed proof of her bank balance before offering respect wasn't someone she wanted in her life. True power, she had learned, wasn't about making people see your worth. It was about knowing your worth so deeply that their blindness couldn't touch you. The cab merged onto the highway, leaving the party behind. Amada leaned back against the seat and closed her eyes. Tomorrow, the story of what happened at the Langston estate would spread through every social circle that mattered. Victoria's reputation would never fully recover. The guests who had participated in Amada's humiliation would spend weeks wondering if anyone had noticed if their cruelty would come back to haunt them. But Amada wouldn't be thinking about any of that. She would be on a call with Richard discussing clean energy in Senegal. She would be reviewing proposals from entrepreneurs who reminded her of herself 15 years ago. She would be building something that mattered. The party was already forgotten. She had work to do. So that's Amada's story. A woman who walked into a room full of people who decided she was nobody and walked out having shown them exactly who they really were. If this story made you think, if it reminded you of a time when someone judged you before they knew you, or a moment when you realized that real respect has nothing to do with what you wear or what you own, I'd love to hear about it. Drop your story in the comments below. And if you want more stories like this, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next one. Thanks for being here. See you in the next story.